Hello, and welcome to Catholicism in the Car. My name is Parker Zerbal. Okay, I want to continue my reflections on why people don't seem to be thinking very deeply anymore about things. What was providential is while I was at work today, I was going out in the field with one of my bosses. I have multiple bosses at work, and we got into a really great conversation. And one of the things that he brought up, I didn't bring this up, was how people today don't seem to be thinking as deeply as they used to. People don't think about philosophical truths, or don't even consider theological truths oftentimes. Because it's hard to consider theological truths if you don't first consider philosophical truths. Theology is built upon the ground of philosophy. This is why in Catholic seminaries, and I know a lot of Protestant seminaries as well, I know Missouri Synod Lutherans do this in their seminaries. They require philosophical studies before one goes on to theological studies. Yeah, and so I thought it was pretty neat how I had just been talking about this earlier in the morning, and then we got into a conversation about it. And he made some interesting reflections that I would like to share with you. First off, screens and the quote-unquote increase in ADHD among children, and among adults for that matter. So first off, screens. And these two things are connected, screens and ADHD. At least so I'm told. My wife is a psychology major, and in multiple of her classes throughout college, professors would bring up this issue of ADHD being very much overdiagnosed, and in a lot of ways caused by screens. And the problem with screens, and with phones and things like that, but I would say particularly screens with it's the visual element and the color and the constantly moving pictures, and what that does is it gives the person constant stimulus, because now auditory stimulus is one thing, and it can create effects on the body in both negative and positive ways. But visual stimulus has even greater effects upon the body, and upon the brain, most particularly. What happens is that the person's body gets used to the stimulation that comes from the screen. And if the screen has lots of fast-moving pictures, movements, scene changes, things of that nature, and then also a lot of colors, this kind of reacts in the brain the stimulus response for looking at things in nature. Like if you think, if you were in the woods and something really colorful flashed out, you would immediately look towards it and try to figure out what it was. Now you times that by you have 100 colors, I don't know, every 20 seconds on certain shows or YouTube videos, and Or video games. Video games are probably the most egregious examples of this. The reason why video games are so addicting is because of particularly the visual stimulus. And what this creates in the body is that the body gets used to that stimulus. It gets used to constantly reacting to these things in its environment. So if you were to be in the forest and you see a bird fly by, a brightly colored bird, you're gonna look towards it. Now, what happens if you see birds flying by all the time and there are multiple different colors and you have that flying around, every few seconds, basically? You're gonna get pretty jolted. You're gonna get pretty jittery because you're constantly trying to keep up with all the stimulus. That's what happens. The body is trying to keep up with all of the stimulus that it's receiving. And then eventually, the body gets dependent upon and used to all that stimulus. Our bodies build habits. That's why, if somebody's learning a musical instrument, eventually it just becomes second nature to them. They don't even hardly have to think about it. It's muscle memory. And likewise, there's muscle memory with these kinds of stimulus reactions. And so thus, people start getting that kind of jitteriness that can occur with ADHD. That's just on a bodily level. Let's also talk about how it would work on the level of the mind. And I would need my wife to be here to really correct me on this. Okay, so the stimulus in the mind and what it does to the brain. I mean, it's basically the same sort of reactions as what I just described. As what I just described happens to the body, but yet it begins to happen to the mind. The mind starts to be racing. The mind starts to get almost jittery. And what is ADHD? Attention deficit hyper something disorder. So you have an attention deficit. You can't focus on one thing for a long time because your brain has become accustomed to really only focusing on one thing for a few seconds. You focus on one color, then another, or one stimulus, then another, and so on and so forth. And you need constantly changing visuals. Well, you're going to get attention deficit. And it's hyperactive disorder. And then the hyperactive, it would seem, would be the body part, where the body is constantly moving and jittery, and the body becomes hyperactive for these reasons. So, yeah, it certainly does have an effect on man's ability to be able to think deeply. These sorts of stimuli. So, I had some good food for thought today talking about that. All right, thanks. Real quick, please feel free to subscribe to any of my podcasts on any of the podcast players. Find me on YouTube. Please subscribe. Like me on Facebook, like the Catholicism Car channel on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're all there. Catholicism Car. And then I also have a Patreon account if you wish to support what I do at this podcast and this YouTube channel. And you can also support us on Anchor.fm. There's a support button there you click on. I also have links to all this on my website's support page at www.catholicisminthecar.com.